Hey there, I'm Mr. Terry, a high school history teacher. Welcome back to another History Teacher Reacts video. All right, I've got a lot of requests from the new post by Atun-Shei Films. And this video is titled, Is Civil War History Being Rewritten? Now, I've heard people that have supported like either side of the Civil War say that the other side is the one that is rewriting the Civil War history. So which take is gonna happen in this video? All right, thanks again for everyone that has been recommending this video and recommending videos in general. Good place you can do that is over on our Discord server down below. You'll find a link to it. There is a channel for video suggestions. And of course, put them in the comments too. I love to see it there. All right, Atun-Shei Films is 1,000 or less than 1,000 subs away from hitting 300K. And if you're a Civil War buff, I know you're following, but if you're not, you should follow anyways. All right, let's go and checkmate, Lincolnites.
Slavery. The war was about slavery. God damn
North
it.
guy versus South guy. All right, I assume all of you have seen the Checkmate Lincolnite videos. If you haven't, this is probably not the greatest place to start. So go to his channel and you can see the originals there. I've done some commentary on some of the videos too, if you're looking for that as well. But yeah, and by the way, the original video link to this video is down below, of course.
How is this even possible? Is it the school system? Is it your home life?
Oh, come on, I was into that. That disgusting film is nothing more than Yankee propaganda. History is written by the victors.
That is
and
true.
now through political correctness, today's media are rewritten as those of us with common sense know as true history.
I actually really love the format. So like, Atun-Shei, amazing, just a very good filmmaker. Like as far as like the acting is great, the editing is great, having the two characters of course is super funny, and I know it's very much slanted towards like the Union and kind of makes fun of the Confederacy and stuff like that, and I think everybody gets that, but it also brings a lot of these comments that he'll continuously put in the video of people that are especially are supporting the Confederacy side, or at least are, you know, disagreeing with kind of the pro-Union side, I guess, of the Civil War. But playing each character, a Union and a Confederate soldier, is always so funny. But I like when he puts in the comments that people actually put in there. Like
well,
this.
that's a bunch of baloney, and you're living proof of that. Millions of people around the world believe that the South seceded
Union
in the
guy's
Civil
always
War
calm.
because of states' rights and taxation. And through most of the 20th century, many Americans even regarded antebellum slavery as a relatively benevolent and humane institution. And I don't know if you remember, but you guys lost, like, big time. You got your asses handed to you.
Simmer down.
Your asses were surgically removed and physically placed within the grasp of thine own hands.
All right, that's enough of your cheek. This is serious business. In elementary school, middle school, high school, and college, we all learned that the Civil War was about states' rights and all the reasons behind the war.
100% this person's from the southern states. By the way, I'd really love to hear if you are from the southern states of the United States. What has been your experience in learning about the Civil War? How is it framed? I'm really interested to know, because I did not grow up in the southern states, so, you know, it's obviously different than what I learned.
But then, not too long ago, the narrative changed. And suddenly the Civil War was 100% about slavery and only slavery. Literally nothing else. I've literally watched history be rewritten in front of my eyes. But I suppose you think I'm just being ridiculous.
Rewritten, or, I mean, rewritten? I don't know about that. That's like taking the source material and then rewriting it. They're just looking at different source materials. You're talking from secondary sources, because when you're talking about a school curriculum, it's all, so much of it's secondary sources, or at least it's handpicked primary sources, right? So, yeah. Anyway, the thing I always hear though is, you know, when they say it's about states' rights, then usually the counter to that I've heard was, you know, in high school and in college history classes was, okay, a state's right to be able to do what? Right? And that's usually where people say, well, do whatever they want, you know, including slavery.
No, I think you're right. The Civil War history is absolutely being rewritten.
Checkmate, Lincolnites.
It's over. End the film. It's over.
But
End it. But correctly, is that what you're saying?
history is always being rewritten.
That is
That's
true.
how it works.
It is.
Historical hypotheses are made to be challenged and questioned as others bring attention to different evidence or come at the issue from illuminating new perspectives.
And it's important to understand, you know, people should view history the same way you view a science, like scientific theories. You don't prove theories, you disprove them, and you change your ideas about them based off of based off of new evidence. Anytime there's new evidence, you need to reassess it, and you're able to make different conclusions and hypotheses. And we should be doing the same thing with history and with science, right? New evidence should always be able to change things. So we should always be re-examining those sources.
That's right. There are always two sides of history, and both need to be heard even if you disagree with one point of view. Well, I think there's a hell of a lot more sides of history than just two. There are as many different perspectives on the Civil War as there were people who lived through it.
And in fact, what we should be looking a lot more of is third-person sources. We don't do that a lot. What is a third-person source? Someone neutral that has a source as close to being a primary source as possible. We ignore those too. You know what's something interesting that you can also look at is look at the history of something. Like if you're from a country, look at the history of it written by an historian or somebody not from your country and see how it compares.
But not all perspectives are valid history. Some
True.
narratives can be misleading or even outright false. And for
True.
a historian to parrot them uncritically out of some misguided sense of inclusion is just really fucking irresponsible. What you consider to be the southern side of the story of the Civil War is literally just lost cause mythology. The lost cause isn't a valid point of view on anything. It's just a collection of factually incorrect claims. It's not a question of perspective or interpretation. This stuff is just demonstrably wrong.
Okay, before he gets into that, I don't think, though, I don't know if he was necessarily meaning this, though. It doesn't mean that every Southern perspective is incorrect or invalid, though. I don't think he was trying to make that. That's not true at all. In fact, we should look at all sources, right? But understand, that's why sourcing is so important. Something we try to teach, you know, I think we do. I think we're doing a better job. I hope these days, at least from my perspective and experience, we're doing a better job as educators doing that, of getting people to understand sourcing and why sourcing matters.
Is you? And what exactly do you and your cronies consider the lost cause myth? Because from what I've seen in your channel, anything that doesn't depict Confederate soldiers as bloodthirsty villains is lost cause propaganda. What you are calling the lost cause myth is so unbelievably broad, it could encompass essentially any unbiased review of the
That's
Civil
actually
War.
fair. I think that's
I'm
fair.
referring to something very specific when I talk about the lost cause.
That was a fair
myth.
comment.
Essentially, it's a pro-Confederate belief system that emerged from the post-war histories of the White South. Its seeds were planted during the war itself, as Confederates tried to solicit international sympathy by distancing themselves from the cause of slavery for which they seceded, but really came to the fore in the 1880s and 90s, when ex-Confederates began a systematic campaign to sanitize their reasons for secession and paint their actions during the war in the best possible light.
Interesting analysis there. So the idea that he's saying the reason why it being a why the Civil War was, from the Southern perspective, about states' rights is a way to distance themselves from the horrific nature of slavery. Interesting. I hadn't really thought of it that way. Do you think that's right? Do you think that's correct? I mean, if you find yourself on that spectrum or whatever of analyzing the Civil War, you may not admit it, but do you think that is possible? That is something even subconsciously maybe you're doing, is trying to distance yourself and your ancestry or something from slavery by saying it was about states' rights and something else? I'd love to know. Put a comment down below.
Seems far-fetched to me. What, so former Confederates just rewrote history within living memory and everybody just went along with it? Pretty much, yeah. That's crazy. Is it? I mean, look at what's been happening in recent American history. No matter what side of the political divide you're on, I think you would confidently say that the people on the other side have deceived themselves into believing a narrative that's completely divorced from reality. Amen, brother. At least with the lost cause, there's a grain of truth. Like, if you squint at Civil War history and cock your head, you can kind of see it. But today, I mean, shit. Remember the gay frog guy? Lots of people were totally on board with the gay frog guy. People crave meaning in their lives. People desperately crave meaning, and myths can give it to us.
You're talking about Alex Jones?
I say there was no lost cause. State rights. Well, let's look at some...
Okay, so wait, what did this comment? Sometimes I have to stop on the comments. Hope you're cool with that. It shows you don't have a clue about the American people who lived this war. Okay, so that has no content to it, though. So you can shrug off comments like that. At least some of the other ones they actually had discussing points. This is just nuh-uh. Just saying nuh-uh and then moving on.
There's no lost cause. State rights. Well, let's look at some of the evidence. As we've talked about before, defense of home and hearth was not the only reason Confederate soldiers went to war. Defense of slavery and white supremacy were also powerful motivating factors, and a significant number of them said as much in their diaries and letters. Oh, gracious, this again. And I suppose this is where you bust out her racist quote. I literally have a whole duffel bag full of them. Okay. Pick a quote, any quote.
I'm gonna spend so much time reading his comments. I mean, it provides future content. All right, what do we got?
The Vandals of the North are determined to destroy slavery.
Oh, this is primary source
We must
material.
all fight, and I choose to fight for Southern rights and Southern liberty.
Southern rights to what? Which Southern
Staff
rights?
Surgeon, 4th Tennessee Infantry, April.
And which freedoms?
1861. Another one? Where are you going with
And for
this?
whom?
You'll see.
All Southerners? Some
A
Southerners?
stand must be made for African slavery, or it is forever lost.
True.
William Grimble, 1st South Carolina Artillery, November 1860.
So is he trying to put the Southern, the Confederate dude, trying to find evidence that there were people then that actually said it was about slavery? Because there's plenty of evidence for that, if that's really something people deny.
Another?
And there's evidence that would say it's a broader
This
thing, like
country
states'
without
rights.
slave
Sure,
labor
both.
would be
Both
completely
can be right at the
worthless.
same time.
We can only live and exist by that species of labor, and hence I am willing to fight to the last.
Jeez.
William Nugent, 28th Mississippi Infantry, September 1863. Let me top you off there.
Live and exist by the status quo that was already established, yes.
Lincoln declares the blacks entitled to all the rights and privileges as American citizens. So imagine your sweet little
By 1864, you started seeing that, but that would not have been something you would have seen pre-Civil War from Lincoln.
girls in the schoolroom with a black woolly-headed Negro and have to treat them as their equal. William Garner,
Jeez.
10th Arkansas Cavalry, January 1864.
I mean, those same comments are going to be made 100 years later, too.
Refills are free.
In decent amounts, too. Right?
I will show the Yankees that a white man is better than a... Nah, that's a bad word. Jonas Bradshaw, 38th North Carolina Infantry, April 1862. And that guy was just a private, a poor farmer. Well, let's do one more, just because we're having so much fun.
Drinking like a White Claw or something.
With me, I love home and all that surrounds it as much as anybody. But if I have to be the equal to a nope, I had rather never come home. And better me fall in the struggle for it. Will McKee, 18th Georgia Infantry, September 1861. Jesus. There's a lot more where that came from in the duffel bag, but I don't want to belabor the point. We've covered this before. So, during the Civil War, many Confederate soldiers expressed very strong pro-slavery sentiments. But decades after the war, they changed their tune. In Sam Watkins' famous
The same people, though, that wrote those quotes, or the generation after? That'd be my question.
Confederate memoir Company H, written 20 years after the events in question, the author plainly stated that
we believe in the doctrine of state rights, they in the doctrine of centralization. We only fought for our state rights, they for union and power. The South fell battling under the banner of state rights, but yet grand and glorious, even in death.
Weird, right? Or we could listen to the 1947 audio interview of 101-year-old Confederate veteran Julius Howell, which has gone viral in a video posted by the eminent historian Black Confederate One, and is often touted as definitive proof that Confederate soldiers did not fight for slavery.
The South did not fight for the preservation or extension of slavery. My friend, it was a great curse on this country that we had
47?
slavery. And I thank God that I did not bring up my boys and girls under a system of slavery under which I was brought under.
He was, I mean, he
What
would have been
did you
old, though.
boys fight for then? For states' rights. For states' rights.
And it wasn't just the soldiers who were saying this stuff. The men of the upper echelon of the Confederate government, former plantation owners who in 1860 had shouted from the mountaintops that they were seceding to preserve slavery, seemed to suffer from a severe case of post-war amnesia. So said Jefferson Davis in his memoirs.
Slavery was in no wise the cause of the conflict.
And as former Confederate Vice President Alexander Stephens argued in 1868,
The conflict on this question of slavery was not a contest between the advocates or opponents of that peculiar institution.
so what
There's a lot of perspectives. I mean, we can't deny it. There's a lot of things and a lot of that. But is the states' rights thing just trying to be one? I don't know how I explain this. One notch ahead, one notch above the slavery argument, that slavery should fall into that umbrella of what should be considered states' rights.
changed?
That makes sense?
What happened? The lost cause happened. Look, after 1865, material conditions in the rebellious states were dire. Southern wealth had been reduced by 60%, down from pre-war levels,
Now you have wage
caused as much
labor
by
and all that.
Confederate mismanagement as by Union invasion. Half of all their farm machinery was inoperable, the railroad system was in ruins, and what little industrial capability they had was utterly destroyed.
Which was very
These
little.
factors had a dramatic, negative impact on white Southerners' quality of life, and the humiliation of defeat was psychologically devastating. In their personal correspondences, many Confederates wrote frankly about their experiences of despondence and
That a
hopelessness
citation?
after the
Oh,
surrender.
yeah.
Many
That's
fell
awesome.
into a spiral
Love that he does
of
that.
anxiety, depression, and alcohol abuse. The imagery that pervades their writings were of
They're actually
death
listening?
and darkness, gloom in the tomb. With the power of the slavocracy forever shattered, ex-Confederates of the plantation class would soon have to jostle for political power against a whole host of highly motivated new rivals: upcountry Unionists, white yeoman farmers, Afro-Creole elites, and Republican freedmen. And all these other Southerners had something that ex-Confederates distinctly lacked: a story. A unifying mythology that defined them as a group and a people. In 1865, what was the Confederate story? Rebels, failures, slavers, traitors. As an early leader of the United Confederate Veterans put it,
If we cannot justify the South in the act of secession, we will go down in history solely as a brave, impulsive, but rash people who attempted in an illegal manner to overthrow the Union of our
I mean,
country.
I don't.
it was
Yeah, I don't think that was like a hot take necessarily, but and when was this? This was after the war, right? Oh, way after the war. So we cannot justify the South in the act of secession will go down in history solely as brave, impulsive, but rash people who attempted in an illegal manner to overthrow the Union. I mean, yeah, it's true.
Who attempted in an illegal manner.
eternally dishonorable reputation. Something had to be done to avoid it. Ex-Confederates needed to improve their self-image. Less than a year after Appomattox, one Georgia newspaper predicted that
The victory over Southern arms is to be followed by a victory over Southern opinions.
ex-Confederates were determined to control the
Plan B, right? You lost, plan A, so B, change the narrative.
And almost as soon as the guns went silent, they rushed to write and publish Southern-centric histories of the war between the states. Seems they were right to do so, for time proved that newspaper man right. Marxist, Maoist, mainstream historians have made it their non-binary mission to shove a plant-based Civil War narrative down our collective throats. Descendants of the Confederacy take pride in their ancestors and should be allowed to honor them as New England and other regions honors their ancestors. But the Confederacy is being unfairly disparaged by today's cultural genocide that is also degrading the Founding Fathers and other once esteemed aspects of American heritage.
True.
Well, you're allowed to honor your Confederate ancestors just like you're allowed to buy truck nuts. You're free to do these things, they just make you look like a fucking asshole. And cultural genocide. Jesus Christ, you're a drama queen. But is that term not apropos for the Reconstruction era South?
I forgot about
We had
those.
failed to
They're
achieve
so stupid.
political independence, but in undertaking to write our own histories, we began a fight.
If you want, you look at truck nuts. Right? I don't know what you're gonna find on Google, but it was a thing and it was really stupid.
For cultural independence that would become an enduring part of American life. What? It's very uncanny how you go from just totally insane to completely reasonable at the drop of a hat. It's just profoundly weird. But yeah, you're absolutely right. The first major offensive of this
For
cultural
you guys that are on there having those kind of conversations, like heated conversations, do you find moments of civility like that, like they're having right now, or is it always just chaos.
War of Independence came in 1866, when Edward A. Pollard, the wartime editor of the Richmond Examiner, began publishing his war histories, most notably The Lost Cause, a new Southern history of the War of the Confederates, which is probably the origin of the term. Rabidly pro-slavery before the war, Pollard went on to become a Confederate true believer and a tireless evangelist of the Southern side of history. In his books, Pollard did not deny that slavery played a role in secession, but tempered his analysis with white supremacist apologia.
The occasion of that conflict was what the Yankees called, by one of their convenient labels in political nomenclature, slavery. But what was, in fact, nothing more than a system of Negro servitude in the South, one of the mildest and most beneficent systems of servitude in the world.
This claim was still pretty close to the wartime Confederate Party line. At this early stage,
Whoa.
the exact tenets of the myth were still unformed. But very quickly, more and more Southern histories began to deny that slavery had had anything to do with secession, instead fixating on more defensible motives like states' rights, libertarian government, and anti-industrialism. The first issue of the Southern Historical Society papers, an influential Lost Cause periodical, indicated a subtle but definitive shift in Southern historiography.
The late Civil War, which raged in the United States, has been very generally attributed to the abolition of slavery as its cause. But a close study of the history of the times will bring us to the conclusion that it was the fear of a mischief far more extensive and deeper even than this, which drove cool and reflected minds in the South to believe it was better to make the death struggle at once than to submit tamely to what was inevitable. Had the South permitted her property, her constitutional rights, and her liberties to be surreptitiously taken from her without resistance and made no moan, would she not have lost her honor with them? If the alternative were between such a loss and armed resistance, is it surprising that she preferred the latter?
Lost Cause writers paid particular attention in those early days to rehabilitating the reputations of key Confederate leaders, especially Robert E. Lee. No one was more instrumental in this than Lee's old division commander Jubal Early, who published the first book-length memoir of any Civil War general late in 1866. Drawing on experience from his years as a lawyer, Early began a campaign of ideas that was so scorched earth it would have made Sherman blush. His histories defended
Great
every
analogy.
last aspect of Lee's generalship, and when any historian dared to disparage the old hero, Early viciously attacked them in print. For decades after the Civil War, no one ever took up a pen to write about the conflict without living in mortal fear of Jubal Early. Old Jube simply wished to defend General Lee from the defamations and detractions of ignorant persons. Concerning the Battle of Gettysburg, for example, he set the record straight. Some said Marse Robert was responsible for our defeat. Imagine that, it's nonsense. General Longstreet, bless his heart, failed to carry out Lee's order to attack at dawn on July the 2nd. If he had attacked promptly, we would have carried the day and won the battle. I doubt it not.
Okay.
Well, there's only one problem with that, which is that no dawn order was ever given. As far as anybody knows, Early made that little factoid up at Lee's birthday celebration in Lexington, Virginia in 1872. And a lot of Confederate veterans who had been officers at Gettysburg were kind of baffled by it. But Early kept repeating it and writing about it. And William Nelson Pendleton, Lee's old chief of artillery, dutifully propagated the lie in his writing. It would become so prevalent that it was part of most histories of the Battle of Gettysburg until well into the 20th century. But what possible reason would they have to fib? Well, because Longstreet had quarreled with Lee, and Longstreet had been right. After the war, he publicly criticized Lee's leadership, so he was high on Jubal's shit list. Not to mention he famously became a Republican and worked closely with the Grant administration to help enfranchise freedmen during Reconstruction. Wait, so when I call him a scalawag, I'm basically just saying that he didn't completely hate black people? Yeah, that's more or less the historic context of that word. A scalawag is a white southerner who doesn't completely hate black people, and a carpetbagger is a white northerner who doesn't completely hate black people.
Remember, we teach those terms, like those in U.S. history classes teach those terms, scalawag and carpetbagger, and kind of where they come from there, and they're kind of interesting terms. But then, like how they're, I wouldn't say redefined, but how they became so like prevalent to in the South. Because Reconstruction, I mean, God, what a mess, right? Brings another question. I'd love to hear from y'all in the comments. What do you think What do you think would have been different if Lincoln had been able to, you know, live and actually oversee Reconstruction? Because Andrew Johnson, of course, gets a lot of crap for it, and he was seen to be very much a political choice, you know, for as a VP candidate. But how do you think that would have been different? Do you think it would have been a lot more ruthless against the status quo and former slaveholders and stuff like that? Or do you think it would have been kind of the same? What do you think? Let me know down below.
Oh, yeah. Well, then why didn't Longstreet try to defend himself, huh? If he was so blameless and innocent. He did, just badly. His public retorts to Early and Pendleton were ponderous and tone-deaf and full of sloppy misstatements of fact. It only made him more unpopular, and his inaccuracies gave lost cause evangelists an opening to shred his credibility. You call these historians evangelists like the lost cause was some sort of religion or something. Well, it kind of became one in a way, especially after Reconstruction.
It's very important to people.
In the 1870s, the tenets of the lost cause consolidated themselves into a coherent mythology. Slavery wasn't a major cause of the war, states' rights, tariffs, whatever. Lincoln was a tyrant / northern aggression.
Right.
The Confederate Army was completely badass, and Bob Lee was the perfect man. Sherman was worse than Genghis Khan, and the Union Army was full of rapers and pillagers.
The American
basically,
Genghis
the stuff
Khan.
you and I have been talking about for years now. Black people and everybody up north still thought this stuff
Maybe
was
I should start
pretty
using
bonkers.
that in lessons.
Union veterans organizations were particularly outspoken in their skepticism and disgust, but it came to be widely believed in the white South. And just as people congregate in churches, temples, or mosques to worship their God, Southerners congregated at reunions, funerals, and monument dedications to reinforce their cultural myth through ceremony and ritual. Oh, come on. These were veterans' reunions, not the black sleep of Kali Ma. These events were just soldiers hanging out and reminiscing. What's the big deal? Oh, but it was so much more than that.
I mean, yeah. That's what they all do. They all, you know, anyone if it's a veteran of war, is when they get together, they're going to reinforce their mission. They don't, you know, people don't want to say that it was for bad causes or, you know, something like that. You want to, you know, live a life and get reassured that you were doing the right thing, doing what you were told, you were doing it for good reason. It's got to happen with anybody from any war.
These were profoundly meaningful events for these people, and the level of reverence on display was over the top even by Victorian standards. The ecclesiastical aspects were overt. Southern religious leaders had been among the most vocal secessionists and later became some of the most passionate lost cause evangelists. Sermons delivered by these men were a mainstay of post-war ceremonies, blending evangelical Protestantism with the emerging theology of the Confederate Redeemer Nation.
That was always part of the
Reverend
culture,
J. William
the Southern
Jones,
culture.
a wartime chaplain, Baptist preacher, and key contributor to the Southern Historical Society papers, typically began his prayers with the words,
Oh God, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, God of Israel, God of the centuries,
Pretty common
God
opening.
of our fathers, God of Jefferson Davis, Robert Edward Lee, and Stonewall Jackson.
I mean, technically,
Lord of hosts and
supposed to be God of everybody,
King of
right?
kings.
Like any other religion, the Lost Cause had its pantheon. Lee and Davis, having suffered for their people, were identified with Christ. Stonewall Jackson, long-bearded and wild-eyed, syncretized with Moses. Longstreet, that errant disciple and betrayer, was Judas. The Lost Cause had its iconography. The battle flag was as sacred and ubiquitous as the crucifix, and as monuments started springing up all over the South in the 1880s and 90s, graven images of Confederate saints were imbued with special significance as altars and gathering places. Wartime artifacts took on the quality of medieval relics, and veterans organizations were encouraged to guard official Confederate documentation, as one United Daughter of the Confederacy put it, as zealously as the children of Israel did the Ark of the Covenant.
I mean, it seems like what everybody on both sides of all wars do. They romanticize it, that kind of thing. Is it more so here on this Confederacy side? I mean, maybe, but I mean, it just seems like something that would happen to anybody on any side of any war.
Lost Cause
View it this way, to treat it this
literally
way,
referred to as catechisms. You can still find one on the Sons of Confederate Veterans website. So ex-Confederates were a little extra in their commemorations of the war. So what? Still seems pretty innocuous to me. Not so much. There was always
That's originally kind of what I was thinking. So I'm interested to hear
political
his rebuttal.
dimension to Lost Cause ceremonies, and political advocacy was an important function of veterans groups, mainly in support of segregationist policies designed to continue white rule in the South. Politicians frequently spoke at Confederate reunions, and as the decades wore on, different political movements claiming the heritage of Lost Cause cultural memory made veterans events their soapbox.
Okay, so they're saying politicians were hijacking that memory to try to preserve the ideals of what they were trying to commemorate, if that makes sense. And that makes sense from a political perspective why you would do that, and that it would be successful to kind of hijack those memories.
In the 19th century, it was anti-Reconstructionists and populists. In the 20th, Wilsonian Democrats and civil rights era reactionaries. This continues today in Lost Cause spaces online, where pro-Confederate blogs, Facebook groups, and subreddits fearmonger about cancel culture just as much as they celebrate Civil War history. Those websites sure love you? Oh yeah, big fans. In the late 19th century, a major goal of the Lost Cause religion was to institutionalize itself. Early, Pendleton, Jones, and others were keenly aware that passing their ideas down to the next generation would be crucial to preserving the Confederate legacy. So they focused their advocacy on the education system. Now that the United Confederate Veterans and United Daughters of the Confederacy were established and active, Lost Cause evangelists had an organizational network to spread their ideas. Young women of the pre-war planter class, finding themselves in need of income after the abolition of slavery, gravitated toward teaching, and by the 1890s dominated primary school education.
That's true. That is what happened.
Jones and Susan Pendleton Lee,
by far, most teachers were women.
Who was William Pendleton's daughter.
Now it is very different. Although, I mean, it kind of changes between secondary and elementary.
Both authored popular textbooks in the 1890s advancing the Lost Cause mythos, and Jones urged his fellow ex-Confederates to fight tooth and nail against the introduction of Northern-authored textbooks into Southern classrooms.
We should demand the abolition of Yankee school histories from our schools, and if they force the issue, we should squarely meet it and fight for a change in our school authorities if they persist in using Yankee school histories.
Ex-Confederates' mission to
very much going into politicians or whatever, probably campaigning on that kind of stuff, that they're going to be instrumental on educational curriculum and probably support school board members and stuff like that, depending on how it worked back then. Yeah, that's a big thing you hear today too, with a lot of people campaign on what they want to do with school curriculums. The hot topic right now of trying to change or maybe clarify or push certain things, or the removal of certain things in curriculums. I know I hear it and see it all the time as a public education teacher.
Indoctrinate the rising generation was a resounding success. By the turn of the 20th century, the culture war was won, and the impact of that victory was soon felt all around the country. In 1896, post-war racial issues came to a head with the Supreme Court ruling Plessy versus Ferguson, which of course established separate but equal as a law of the land. White Southerners accepted legal segregation to be an effective substitute.
Took a long time to break that thing apart, Plessy versus Ferguson.
For slavery as a tool to control the black underclass. When the Spanish-American War and World War I gave the reunited states a new sense of national purpose, white Northerners grew more inclined toward reconciliation, and many came to accept the Lost Cause version of Civil War history. Essentially, to reunite white America, Northerners sacrificed the rights and dignity of black America. Blacks had fought and died for the Union and were instrumental in quelling the rebellion. But the Jim Crow era saw the Confederate vision of a white supremacist nation rise from the grave. Hell, the federal government even retired the hated blue uniform. In the trenches of the Western Front, Northern and Southern soldier alike wore khaki. But that wasn't the reason behind that decision. Most militaries switched to khaki uniforms around the turn of the 20th century. You should know this.
Not really.
Still a hell of a metaphor, though, ain't it? I'm still skeptical that everybody would just go along with this. Well, in the 20th century, the Lost Cause had a lot of help from the most effective propaganda tool in human history: the movies. D.W. Griffith's infamous 1915 blockbuster The Birth of a Nation and the classic 1939 historical epic Gone with the Wind.
Like writing history with lightning. Woodrow Wilson.
Both reflected and cemented white supremacist interpretations of Civil War history in American culture. By the time Julius Howell was interviewed in the 1940s, the lost cause was firmly established in the popular imagination of a deeply segregated America. But then, in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, things changed. The civil rights movement was a major blow to white supremacy in America. And as people of color gained more social and political agency, historians began to focus more on black perspectives in American history. The story that emerged from this research was a continuous struggle against authoritarianism and bigotry that resonated with Americans of the Vietnam era. In contrast, the lost cause came increasingly to be seen as a hateful and oppressive ideology, and mainstream historiography started to seriously question its legitimacy. The cat was out of the bag. In the 80s and 90s, historians like Gary Gallagher, James McPherson, Gaines Foster, and others thoroughly dismantled the tenets of the lost cause with some excellent
He's not chiming in. I was gonna, make a note at the end of the video, but these Checkmate Lincolnite videos usually had a lot more of a back and forth. Of just saying that there are no rebuttals to this stuff, or is the Confederate guy like slowly coming around? Is that kind of where the story arc is going?
But there remained a serious disconnect
Not as
between this
defensive.
growing academic consensus on one hand and the perception of the public at large on the other. The 1990 Ken Burns documentary The Civil War and the 1993 Ron Maxwell film Gettysburg spawned a huge surge of public interest in the Civil War.
Those movies are so long. Gettysburg's longer than the battle, and I think Civil War, Ken Burns, is longer than the war was.
But they also propagated common misconceptions with origins in the lost cause myth. The Burns documentary's over-reliance on narration by Southern novelist Shelby Foote left many viewers with a mistaken impression of the causes of secession. And the overwrought sentimentality and sanitized violence of Maxwell's film glorified the war and the soldiers who fought in it. It also downplayed the importance of slavery to the Confederate cause. Gettysburg inspired thousands of people to become Civil War reenactors, and to this day, at public events, many reenactors will teach a version of Civil War history more inspired by the movie than by actual evidence. Are you about to shit on God's generals again? Just one more time, please, and then I'll be done forever. You really can't help yourself, can you? The Lost Cause regained even more ground in 2003 with Gods and Generals, Maxwell's prequel to Gettysburg. This film wholeheartedly endorses the most counterfactual aspects of the Lost Cause myth and has done enormous damage to public understanding of the Civil War. Heavily based on late 19th century Lost Cause histories, the film has become a banner for white supremacists and neo-Confederates to rally under, a powerful 21st century expression of the Lost Cause religion. Great movie. The South was right.
Oh,
but then
is that person
of the Lost Cause religion. Great movie.
Like when you go that far, you see the comments, right? Name is The South Was Right. He's got a picture of Lincoln being assassinated with Booth. And is this just a memer? Or do you think it's legit? Do people go that far to like live an entire persona? Or do you feel it's just their pose or their, again, just memers? What do you think? Let me know down below.
Movie. The South was right. But then came the 2010s and the dawn of a new and wide-ranging social justice movement. Police brutality against Black Americans in particular proved to be a major flashpoint for lingering racial issues.
An interesting comment by, I think it was an English teacher that I was talking to, and he's like, "Hey, you're a history teacher," and this was during, again, the big kind of race issues and stuff that, kind of get going around the end of the 19 teens and then into the 20 teens and 2020. Kind of even living this is like, they're asking me, is this kind of what the civil rights movement was like? That like you had these debates happening, and then every once in a while you would have some kind of like event, and it could be met with like oppression or something and big marches and stuff like that. Is that kind of how, is what's happening right now kind of how the civil rights movement kind of went down? And I was like, kinda. I mean, it seems like. Now, I didn't live through the first civil rights movement, so I only looked through it from like an education perspective, but there's plenty of people you could ask for that lived through 50s and 60s. That could say like, what's going on now? Is it comparable at all? Is it did it feel as divisive back in, say, the 60s as it does right now with people being so vehemently on kind of what's been going on right now with people, shooting it down, but then people that are also supporting it? Was it this divisive? And then again, this sporadic, right, over the years. What do you think about that?
This new movement is complex and contentious, and since it's ongoing, it's difficult to make categorical statements. But one thing we seem to be in the midst of is an attempt to break down systemic inequality in the government and economy, which has led to a far more critical historiography of the eras of American history when those systems were established.
Confederate soldier
the
statues.
growing interest in black history seems to be inversely proportional to the lost cause's staying power. As more and more Americans renounce the Confederacy for the slavers' rebellion that it was, those still cleaving to the lost cause religion have become more culturally isolated, their ceremonies, rituals, and catechisms increasingly esoteric and irrelevant. Over the past decade, the lost cause has taken a severe beating, maybe even a fatal one, and a tiny part of that
Perhaps.
has been...
Can it ever recover? Can it recover? What do you think? Can the lost cause movement, you think it can recover?
This show.
I'm not so
like
sure.
that, wouldn't you? But you are unfit to
It would
lift the-
require, I don't know, some kind of mass rewriting, successful rewriting of history, successfully. But it seems like in the era of communication now, it's harder to control a narrative, like maybe you used to be able to, like pre-internet.
The boots of the Confederate heroes you defame. You dare insult General Lee? General Jackson? Well, let me tell you something, Billy. You will never compare to the man that Thomas Jackson was, for you will never be remembered or mentioned 160 years after your death.
Wow.
With all your videos.
This is what you say. This is what someone says when they have nothing else to say anymore. That's it. It just becomes personal. Like you're out of, I mean, maybe there was a bunch of arguments before this by this commenter, but if this is all they said, this is somebody that has no like content actually.
160 years after your death with all your videos. Probably not. If this show is remembered, I would guess it would be as a small footnote of Civil War history's intersection with 21st century internet culture.
Yeah,
if we're fortunate enough
exactly
to
what
have
it is,
any
I
legacy
guess.
at all, I fully expect Checkmate Lincolnites to be considered an imperfect product of its time, like all written or filmed history. I hope we're remembered as a nail in the coffin of the lost cause, but who knows? Only time will tell. But there's one prediction that I am reasonably certain about. If things keep going the way they're going, the lost cause is doomed. The myth is like a frail, diseased, very racist old man drawing rattling breaths from a life support system. Can't we just go ahead and pull the plug?
No, we're still a long way from that, I think. Don't you think? Wait.
1984. Oh my God. 1984.
He was so close, right? He was so close. You wonder in this video, this was going to be it. He was finally going to let go of the Confederate guy, but there's still too much in the defense mechanism tank for him to go and draw from. He can't have that.
And the radical left are seeking to erase the truth of Civil War history. I will always stand for the truth, no matter how unpopular it may be. You're projecting. The evangelists of the lost cause rewrote history in the late 19th century. Now their work is finally being undone. We're finally course correcting away from all their madness and their baggage, and you can't fucking handle it. You're not even pretending to be objective anymore. You reveal yourself for what you've always been. A biased, moralizing, Yankee soy boy! Damn it, Johnny. You never give me the benefit of the doubt. Most people think you're a fucking racist scum of the earth because you fly this fucking flag. You think I'm the bad guy? No. I'm coddling you like the big fucking baby you are.
He's just letting go. Everything, he's just not holding back. There's no more filter. He's ripping it off, going after Johnny
coax
Red.
you into the 21st century before the people behind me fucking drag you there. People think you are a fucking joke, Johnny. You've been discredited time and again. Your monuments are coming down. Your staunchest advocates are doddering old fools, and pretty soon, they're gonna be in the fucking ground. What have we been doing all this time? Have I been talking to a brick wall? Jesus!
Almost like, is this supposed to be like the end? Like, are there, not much else to talk about yet of the whole series? Can't imagine so, but that's what it Almost like how it's feeling. Okay. Retrospect time. All right, here we go. We're leaving the debate bedroom here. We going to the memorials. Johnny can have a thoughtful walk. Go meditate around Stonewall Jackson, yeah, and Jefferson Davis. Oh, the Nazi roommate. This is great production, by the way, right now. He just rips it apart. The MAGA guy just... That's great. What are you gonna do to Davis? This is the Nazi guy, though. This isn't Johnny Red.
Sword of Baron Samedi.
Lightsaber. Nazi lightsaber.
Keep off cemeteries. My lord, with all due respect, I'm uncomfortable with this voodoo ritual. It doesn't feel very Christian to me.
Fear not, my patriotic friend.
We're gonna raise him from the dead.
I have but a small part to play in it.
What do I need to do?
Die.
What the? Sacrifice?
Oh, brothers of the master race.
Oh no.
Oh,
This is what it needed. Blood sacrifice.
The time for
Using
your
Davis and
vengeance
Robert E.
has
Lee.
come. Rise up and claim your destiny. Rise up. Rise up.
This is great now. Just like the production. A lot of work in this. Call of Duty, is this it? Confederate zombies, new game mode. We're done with Nazi zombies and the communist zombies, so we're doing Confederate zombies. Is that the new one? Activision. Start working on it, alright? Stonewall. Jackson's arm. It's gone. This is great filmmaking and stuff. Put a lot of work into this. You can appreciate that. Okay, now what for Davis? Great costumes and skeletons. This is great. I don't know if there was a Confederate zombies or something. Who would a Confederate want to actually revive? Would it actually be Jefferson Davis? Wouldn't it be Lee? I don't know. Maybe not. Oh, snap. The Nazis are bowing to the Confederacy. Great makeup. Costume. Great effects. This is fantastic. Oh no, what's next? Is like a new collab coming? New cross collab going? Oh man, to be concluded. I was wondering if he was going to try to conclude the whole series. Support the Patreon for sure. last second stuff. There's always awesome patrons. Just checking. Awesome. All right, final thoughts. All right, so this ending was so interesting because, and I saw it kind of, I think as the video was going through, that it seemed to be like pushing towards its like logical conclusion. It's like from the series, putting out all the arguments out there that is just, I mean, it's all kind of been tied to the same idea, which is, you know, what actually happened in the civil rights, the American Civil War, and trying to debunk, I guess, any Confederate sympathetic arguments towards the mainstream narrative of that. But yeah, seeing kind of going on now, I'm super interested in seeing what's next because they're bringing the Nazi guy and they're coming back from the dead. So is he going into some awesome like Confederate zombie amateur movie? That would actually be super interesting to check out. And with how well his channel's doing, I wouldn't be surprised to see just a cool production like that, and it done really well. But even if it isn't, it was great to see this. But I'm excited to see where it's going. But yeah, it looks like in this video is really just kind of trying to like put to rest any of the arguments, that pro-Confederacy arguments, and trying to do that. I mean, and just the narrative he was going with this is like there was just nothing to argue anymore from the Confederate perspective, and even trying to get the Johnny Reb, you know, the guy to just realize there are no arguments anymore, and like, why are you still holding on to this narrative? And yeah, it seems like maybe it is coming to an end that way. But anyway, I gave you my thoughts, kind of going through, also gave you some perspective from like the classroom and stuff like that. I've just mostly been just kind of learning from this and learning all this stuff, so I feel kind of like you watching this. But I asked a bunch of questions too throughout the video, and I'd love to see your comments down below. All right, everybody, and with that, thanks again for watching. If you stay with me this long, it's quite a long video, one of the longer videos now I've done recently. But thank you to Atun-Shei for doing some great work that at least is giving a lot of discussion going on, and I definitely appreciate that. Original video link again is down below. Make sure you've given it a like, subscribe, share it to all your friends, share it to anybody. And with that, thanks again for being here. We'll see you next time. Bye.